Hi, my name is David DeLong. I'm a researcher who studies the strategic impacts of the aging workforce. I have wrote a book a few years ago called Lost Knowledge, Confronting the Threat of an Aging Workforce. And more recently, I did a study called Buddy, Can You Spare a Job? The New Realities of the Job Market for Aging Baby Boomers. My interest in the aging workforce stems from an understanding that we're at a critical point in history right now where, because of the demographic trends that are quite well known, we have a huge number of baby boomers queuing up to retire, some of whom are already retiring or have retired. At the same time, we're retiring the first generation of professionals and managers who have deep knowledge of complex technologies, advanced manufacturing, and business processes, and global distributed organizations. So what's happening with the aging workforce at this point in our history is particularly compelling and creates challenges both for employers and for employees and for job seekers. I'm a research fellow at the MIT AgeLab that has been interested and sponsored my research for some years. And I'm president of my own consulting and research firm, David DeLong Associates, based in Concord, Massachusetts. I identified 5 things in this study that were particularly relevant for people who want to be more successful in their job searches. First is to acknowledge the reality of the job market. And that means accepting the notion that age discrimination is out there and that you have to accept that. One expert I interviewed said, when I have a 50-year-old calling me up and start complaining about age discrimination, I say, get over it. Because it's out there, it's a fact of life, and you've got to find ways to adapt to it. Now, it doesn't mean you always roll over and totally ignore it, but the reality is it's just there, and you have to find ways to work around it. So that means looking for industries that are really growing, that are more likely to need your skills. That might be healthcare, it might be transportation, it might be government. These are different sectors that have expressed more interest and willingness to take on older workers. Another is to identify organizations that have a history and a culture of honoring and respecting people of all ages. AARP, of course, has its best employer competition. I happen to be a judge for that program. RetirementJobs.com is another organization that has an age certification program that certifies companies as being particularly friendly to older workers. There are other ways to identify companies that are really have cultures that are open to older job seekers. And the third is to recognize that you're more likely to be successful in smaller and medium-sized companies who have traditionally been the engines of job growth in this culture and are more likely to be open to your idea, to your experience, the value of your experience. Number 2 is to reframe your experience to demonstrate future value. One of the mistakes older job seekers make is they think they have this long resume that will just automatically make them a great candidate. But all the hiring manager cares about today is the value you can bring to solving future problems. So what you have to do is work hard to reframe your experience and say, well, I created a budget, launched these new products, several new products a number of years ago, and that experience will clearly contribute, will make this new project something where I can see the patterns and I can recognize the opportunities and the problems that are likely to come up faster for you to make sure that we get this new product launched faster. So it's looking for ways to reframe what you've done in the past to how you're going to solve business problems in the future. Number 3 is to nurture your network. Every job seeker needs a good network, but the problem for older job seekers now with the onset of the internet and online job applications is the hiring manager has become more and more remote. You can't get to the hiring manager unless you know somebody who knows somebody. So those networks and your ability to connect with people who can introduce you to someone or get you past the palace guard is more critical than ever for older job seekers. So you should never stop developing that network. Somebody told me, he said they make a habit of trying to have lunch with somebody outside their immediate field, immediate company and organization, even industry, every week to try to continually build that network so that when they need it, it's going to be there. Older job seekers tend to underestimate and not realize the DOS is dead, that COBOL is gone, and that Windows 98 is actually obsolete. There are people who, one of the assumptions in the study is a finding that says, of course I know computers. I've been working with Windows 98 for years. And one of the problems for individuals who've been in one organization for a long time is they've gotten used to working with their own technology, with the technology that that organization uses and the established base, which immediately means their technology base is getting obsoleted. They may not be using LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook may or may not be relevant to business, but the latest operating system from Microsoft or from Apple, so or the latest Office products. So knowing that if you're going to be in the job market, you must probably invest some time in updating your technology skills, so that when you go into that job interview, you don't get screened out as a bad fit because you don't know the technology. And believe me, this is an issue for a 35-year-old today as much as a 60-year-old. But it's particularly salient for older job seekers because it becomes an easier screen for hiring managers to screen you out. The last thing is to understand the realities of how our motivation to work changes as we get older. I've seen clear evidence that as people move through, particularly through their 60s, now of course this varies for people. Some people retire at 50, mentally retire at 50. Some people will work till they drop in their 80s, and they're passionate about what they do. But for most people, on average, people in their 60s tend to have less drive, motivation to work. So they start to be more interested in part-time work and have less energy. So one of the dilemmas today is more older job seekers and aging baby boomers frankly need more money because we're all going to live longer. We're all going to live well into our 80s, most of us. That's what the demographics say, if not longer. And yet we greatly underestimate the amount of money we're going to need to in retirement. The number that's thrown around frequently now is $250,000 just for healthcare costs, for supplemental insurance and things that aren't covered by Medicare. And that's the starting number. And in the survey we did with MetLife, we found that over 60% of the people we studied had $250,000 or less in retirement savings. So you have this dilemma between the math that says I need to keep working because I need the money, and the motivational and ambivalence that creeps in about wanting work. So sometimes for older job seekers, there will be a sense of undermining my own job search behavior because I'm really not sure I want to work. But boy, you probably need the money. So that's something. So it's important to understand the realities of your financial situation and then start managing your ambivalence around that. So those are 5 of the things we found that are most critical for older job seekers that, if they're going to be successful going forward. The first is, how old are you? If you're 68, you're a very different job candidate than if you're 54. And the realities is there are going to be a lot fewer options for you if you're in your late 60s. Now, there are always some exceptions, some high-skilled people who have rare skills that are high energy that are going to be always sought after. But as a rule, if you're in your late 60s, you're going to be different than if you're someone still in their 50s who's still potentially a candidate, possibly a candidate in a big organization if they have the right skills. So your age is going to affect your opportunities. Where you live. Do you live in an area of high unemployment? Do you live in Michigan or South Carolina or Rhode Island? Or are you living in an area of relatively low unemployment, Utah, Nebraska, North Dakota? That's going to affect, obviously, the options you have. Do you live near an urban center? Do you live close to a place where there's at least lots of job postings and some turnover? Or do you live in a very small rural town where there are just simply very few jobs? Are your skills highly specialized and quite unique, or are they more general and widespread? And this is the thing that's probably hurt older job seekers the most, is unintentionally and unwarily, a lot of people have gotten into a situation where as they've gotten older, they didn't realize it, but they have very generic skills that are easily replaced by people who are considerably younger and cheaper and perceived as cheaper. We'll set aside the value of your experience for a minute, but the perception is I can hire someone to do the same job who's younger and cheaper. And so If you're in marketing, a generic HR job, office administration, any kind of job that can be done at a similar level by a younger person, it's more difficult than if you're in a high skill area that's quite rare, like a systems engineer, an actuary, a nurse manager. These are all jobs that are highly skilled, take years to train up for, and are not easily replaceable with younger talent. Are you seeking full-time work with benefits, or are you seeking part-time or temporary work? If you're looking for a full-time job with benefits, frankly, most talent management experts and career coaching experts who work with older job seekers say after age 58, in a big organization, you're not really a candidate for a full-time job with benefits. Companies are not, as a rule, going to look at you that way. It's going to be the exception. You're going to have to be much more open to part-time work, temp work, project work, self-employment. So that's another variable that you have to keep in mind. That means you have to look at smaller companies, nonprofits, and government sectors that are really open to, and self-employment, ways of generating work for yourself that you might not have thought of before. And finally, the last one is, are you trying to just recreate your old job, or are you willing to reinvent yourself? I interviewed one former a guy who was 55, who'd been laid off at age 55 as a manager in a cable TV operation. He was shortly afterwards divorced and bankrupt. That's the bad news. The good news was, I was talking to him 10 years later, and he said, in the last 10 years, I've had 8 jobs. I've had this unbelievable ride. I've found out I can do all kinds of things I never realized I could do. I've been knocked down a bunch of times, but I've gotten back up. And the lesson there is the notion of, he says, I keep telling people you have to reinvent yourself. So this is the fifth area, is the notion of not just trying to recreate what you've always done and being willing to reinvent yourself. So these 5 things are the things that are going to differentiate the situations older job seekers are facing, and whether or not, and should shape and help you customize your job search strategy. In my Buddy, Can You Spare a Job study, one of the things I found was 6 assumptions that older job seekers make that really undermine their ability to get a job. These are things you want to be really alert to and really avoid as you look for work. The first is, I'll just do what I was doing before. That totally ignores the realities of how your job and the skills you have may have become more obsolete since you last looked for a job, your lack of job hunting skills, and the realities of age discrimination in the marketplace. To assume if you lose a job that you'll just replace it and go on to doing the same thing again is often a huge mistake. People have to think in terms of reinvention and new ways. You might be using the same skills you had in your previous job, but you have to think about different environments, different scenarios, and adapting that maybe to part-time work or maybe to a series of part-time jobs, and not just assume you're going to replicate your old job. The second mistake that people make is assuming my experience speaks for itself. They'll be lucky to have me. Look at my resume. I've got years of experience. I had one lawyer say to me, she said, you spend your whole life trying to get enough experience, and then you wake up one day and you've got too much. You never see job ads, she said. They often say experience wanted 8 to 12 years. You never see ads saying wanted more than 15 years of experience. So assuming your experience is going to speak for itself is a huge mistake for older job seekers. You must work very hard at translating how your experience is going to help that hiring manager you're looking at solve their future problems, help that organization's performance going forward. What does your experience bring to the future? They don't care, frankly, about your experience. In fact, Richard Leiter, a wonderful researcher around adult development, told me, he said, I find as societies become more technology intensive, they value wisdom less and less. So to assume your experience is going to, and wisdom is going to immediately translate in the marketplace is a huge mistake. The third assumption that older job seekers make is assuming, I just need a job. I don't have time for this touchy-feely stuff about meaningful work. I had an unemployed social worker in northern Vermont tell me, he said, I go into a job interview and the hiring manager will say, what's your vision for this job? And this guy says to me, he says, I don't have a vision for this job. I just need work. This new age stuff makes me sick, he said. And the problem is, as you get older, passion is your key resource. So it's really critical to reflect and spend time better understanding your strengths, values, and the sources of your passion, so that when you go into interviews, you can sell that and sell yourself much more effectively if you're coming from a place of passion. And so being impatient or unwilling to do this kind of work, unfortunately, often keeps people unemployed longer, because they go in and they say, I just need a job. And that's not the way to approach a hiring manager, unfortunately. The fourth assumption older job seekers make is, I'll just use a recruiter or a career coach to get me a job. Well, the idea of going for help, of seeking help and seeking support is excellent, because we shouldn't try to go through this process alone. And there's great benefit in getting feedback from people and advice and coaching in this process. The problem is, a lot of times I had a coach for very senior executives say, oftentimes what happens is we have newly laid off senior managers. They come in and they come to our office and they expect headhunters are going to be calling them left and right, offering them the perfect job. They have no clue or no understanding of the job market. Or less skilled people think they're going to go to a job training program, and that in that program is some miracle and some hidden secrets to help them get the perfect job. The reality is you're ultimately going to have to get that job. There's no savior out there to do this. So assuming, overvaluing recruiters and job placement people is another assumption that people make that's not helpful. A fifth assumption older job seekers make is, I'll just become a consultant, or I'll become a security guard. They tend to choose the path of least resistance. Certain jobs look appealing suddenly when you're on the job market, and a lot of executives, one counselor told me, he said, I have many of the senior executives who come to me assume, I'll just become a consultant. But what they don't understand is they don't have the sales and marketing skills that you need to succeed in that role. And they don't want to work, they're really not happy working alone or suddenly doing the office support work that they've had done for them for years. So there are all these characteristics that they don't understand about the job. Same with a security job role. For less skilled people, they say, I'll become a security guard. Well, suddenly you're working at night, you're alone, and you're on your feet for long periods of time. These are not necessarily characteristics that are appealing to older workers. So you have to really think through and do research on the characteristics of a potential field you might be moving into as you look for jobs, and not necessarily go the path of least resistance. The last and most interesting assumption we found was the notion of course I'm good with computers. I've been working with Windows 98 for years. And people lose touch with the level of their computer skills when they've been in one organization for a long time. They don't realize that when they're in one company, they are tethered really to that technology that's in that culture that's being used. And immediately they're obsolete. Their skills are becoming obsolete because things are changing continually outside. So to underestimate how your technology skills may be out of date is really a very common mistake. And nowadays, unfortunately, in the current job market, coming out of this recession, employers are much pickier. And I had one 70-year-old technical writer say to me, she said she saw a job that she looked perfect for. She thought she was perfect for, except that hiring manager wanted PowerPoint, 6.0, whatever the current generation is. They wanted this perfect skill, and that was the one thing she was missing. But the hiring manager could keep looking until he found that particular capability. So recognizing the match of your technology skills to what's needed in the marketplace and in particular jobs is also a critical thing to keep in mind. In my work, since I wrote the book Lost Knowledge, Confronting the Threat of an Aging Workforce, I've been doing a lot of speaking and consulting across sectors: healthcare, government, aerospace and defense, manufacturing, education. And one of the things I became convinced of a few years ago is that senior executives, particularly CEOs, don't really care about the aging workforce. And there are 5 reasons for this. And this is relevant for job seekers to understand the context here. It may sound harsh, but it's a reality. And the degree to which you can adapt to this reality is likely to increase your effectiveness in the job market. First of all, CEOs and other senior C-level executives don't see a clear link between the aging workforce and performance. Chief executives care about profitability and business outcomes. They don't care about older workers per se. They don't, and the part I've said for a long time, senior executives, particularly in large organizations, don't have a clue about the quality of the knowledge and experience and valuable experience that's walking out the door of their organizations today. When you lose a senior research scientist, you're likely to slow down your new product development process. You lose a senior sales executive, you're losing customer relationship knowledge. You lose a veteran operator on a manufacturing line. You're losing the ability to diagnose and repair problems quickly, to get that line back up and running. There are all kinds of hidden costs to the aging workforce and to people leaving the organization, and senior executives don't get that link necessarily to performance. Secondly, CEOs are really primarily focused on future workforce capabilities. That's the strategic threat, not the aging workforce. That's the bullseye. How do I build future workforce and leadership capabilities for our organization? I talk about the 3 R's. There's retirement, you've got an aging workforce, you've got retention of critical mid-career employees and future leaders, and recruiting of particularly of younger staff. And the problem is most CEOs and many senior executives get overly focused and are overly focused today on recruiting. Where are we going to get our new young talent? Which is absolutely critical to do. They need to do that. But they also need to balance that against the older workers and experience base they're letting walk out the door inadvertently without paying attention to the costs of that and to the retention and development of their mid-careers. Who are critical to the future of their business. I don't know one organization today that isn't worried about accelerating the development of their next generation of leaders. They realize the leadership pipeline is so thin in the middle of the organization that they are really at risk of being able to support growth and cost control and innovation in the future if they don't accelerate the development of those future leaders. There's tremendous uncertainty, unfortunately, out there about pension regulations and tax laws, things brought on by the Pension Protection Act and the IRS. And you have a lot of staff telling senior leaders, we can't retain these older workers, we can't bring them back as employees, as part-time employees. Phased retirement is too confusing, too complicated, given our defined benefit, our retirement plan. And what I say to those people is, why is it that other organizations like the Aerospace Corporation and Monsanto have figured this stuff out? They've got full programs now that are capable of bringing retirees back into the organization as contractors and consultants, or keeping people on the job longer by creating flexible work options. And you need to push your organization, leaders need to push their organizational staffs to find solution to this problem, because the need for using older workers as a resource is only going to grow over time. Although it may not look like it today, it's going to become an increasingly salient issue. A fourth reason CEOs don't care about the aging workforce, frankly, is Wall Street and their boards don't hold them accountable for succession planning for less visible roles. In my new book, The Executive Guide to High Impact Talent Management, we talk about this explicitly, the role of boards of directors in focusing leadership's attention on their future succession plans, particularly below the C-level, the executive suite. We've created a lot of jobs in organizations that are hard to fill, that are complex. A simple example is nurse managers. The job of a nurse manager is frankly very difficult because there are so many stakeholders pulling on people in that job today. The pay is not that much better than a full-time nurse can make, and the headaches are just greater. So I've talked to a lot of hospital administrators who are much more worried about the next generation of nurse managers than they are about their next generation of nurses. But so boards and Wall Street are not making leaders think about these roles, how we're filling these critical roles, whether it's senior project manager, R&D, systems engineers, where are these people coming from in the future? The last reason that CEOs don't care really about the aging workforce, frankly, is they're not going to be around to deal with it. If you look at the longevity or the tenure of most chief executives today, it's only a few years, and this is a hard problem. Dealing with the aging workforce, finding ways to transfer knowledge from one generation to the next requires multifaceted initiatives. It often involves culture change, changing the way the culture looks at older workers and values the contribution of older workers, and the ability to transfer knowledge from that generation to a younger generation. And executives say, too hard. And they tend to focus, as a result, on short-term profitability issues and let that issue slide under the table and think, I'll let the next person handle that. But the long-term implications of this for some organizations are really scary and really amazing because of the talent that's going to be lost in the meantime. For about 15 years now, I've been studying the confluence of two major trends in society. One is the demographic shift that's occurring, that's quite well recognized now, which is aging baby boomers and the lack of employees behind them. At the same time, and what makes my work unique, is recognizing that in the last 30 or 40 years, since the introduction of technology into the workplace, particularly computer technology, we've had this unbelievable explosion of knowledge in organizations. Technical knowledge, how systems work, how networks are put together, how to use technologies, how to integrate them into work, complex scientific knowledge, explosions in all fields of medicine, healthcare, that kind of knowledge, technical knowledge in all fields, advanced process knowledge of how businesses run, global distributed organizations, all these kinds of knowledge domains that are increasingly complex and sophisticated. Much of that resides in people's heads and comes from their experience. So when people leave organizations today, they potentially take with them technical, scientific, managerial knowledge that is critical to the future performance of the business. Let me give you an example. When BP, before the Gulf disaster, they had a senior corrosion engineer, their senior corrosion expert, retired out of the company a few years ago. Within a year, they didn't replace him. Within a year, BP had leaks in their oil pipelines in Prudhoe Bay in Alaska that cost them millions and millions of dollars because they degraded unintentionally their knowledge, the strategic knowledge of corrosion processes and properties and how to maintain these pipe systems in their organization. They ended up in front of Congress, and again, it cost them millions of dollars. That's just a simple one of many examples that I have I've identified over the years of knowledge loss in organizations. Now, what's happened is the recession, unfortunately, has muddied this whole problem of knowledge loss and the aging workforce. And suddenly, people look around and say, what's the problem here? It's not an issue of losing knowledge, losing people. It's a problem of too many people, not enough jobs. So people are feeling at their wits' end about employment, and you have these, just heartbreaking stories of many thousands of people, particularly older job seekers, unable to find work. The dilemma here is that the workforce and the job market is always a landscape. And you have people who are low-skilled, easily replaceable with cheaper labor, either domestically or even outsourcing the job, that makes them suddenly hard to employ and makes it hard for them to find work. And then you have many people who are highly skilled, whose jobs and whose training has taken years to develop, and whose experiential knowledge on the job makes them invaluable. They might be a utility lineman, a nuclear scientist, a senior project manager, a healthcare worker, a doctor. There are just many jobs in our society today that are high-skilled jobs that are not going to be outsourced because they require face-to-face interaction or they require government security clearance or other kinds for other reasons. So again, you have this landscape of of work that, and the recession has again created this false impression that this is not a problem, that this aging workforce issue and the threat of knowledge loss is not a problem, is not the problem that it really is. So what you have is you actually have executives today who are laying off or not hiring in one part of the company, but are not secretly, but are desperately trying to find high-skilled people who are qualified to do higher skill roles that take time to train for. I'm really an optimist at heart, and I believe that even though things look bleak for a lot of people today, and I never want to underestimate the difficulties and the trauma of being an unemployed older worker. It's heartbreaking for a lot of people. But I truly believe that given the demographics, things are actually going to get better for older workers in the next decade. It may not be the next 6 months, it may not even be the next 2 years, but over time, if you can hang on and keep yourself employable, keep yourself healthy, health is just absolutely essential. It's number one in terms of being an effective older job seeker. Passionate, find your passion, and your attitude and your heart, and keep those things strong. There are going to be opportunities in the future because the demographics are immutable. People are going to leave the workforce. They have to, because they're going to retire or for health reasons or die. Health reasons are going to drive them out of work. So, and the generation behind older workers is so much smaller. It's almost 30 million people smaller, that if you have skills and an attitude, you're going to have opportunities, I believe, in the years ahead, even though things don't look good right now.